My wife believed her friends' lies about me cheating, so she tracked my car, bugged my office, and broke into my workplace. I let her dig her own grave, then served her with divorce papers. Sup Reddit. My wife's new friend group ran more surveillance on me than most law enforcement agencies, and somehow I'm the bad guy. This is going to be a long tense, so get your popcorn and strap in. I'm Neil, 33 male. Me and my wife Catherine moved to Columbia, Maryland about 2 years ago because I landed an operations lead gig at a defense contracting firm in Howard County. Supply chain scheduling and delivery logistics for government contracts. Good money, good benefits. We'd been stuck in the same small town in western Pennsylvania for 6 years, and I figured a fresh start might do us both some good. She was on board. We packed up and went. Catherine was the social one between us. Could make friends anywhere. Walk into a room knowing nobody and leave with dinner plans. That was her thing, and I never had a problem with it. Sure enough, within 3 weeks of moving, she had a whole crew. Fitness group near the Merriweather area, brunch spots around the town center, group chats going nonstop. The main one was this woman Courtney. Loud, opinionated, recently divorced, the type who steers every conversation back to herself. Catherine thought she was great. I thought she was a lot, but whatever, not my friend. The first couple months were fine. We were settling in, and Catherine seemed happy. She'd come home from her brunches and tell me about whatever drama was going on in the group, and I'd half listen. Normal married life stuff. But around month 3, something shifted. I chalked it up to the stress of adjusting. New city, no family nearby, me working longer hours than I used to. Told myself she was just getting antsy and it would pass. But it didn't. I started noticing that when I walked in the door, she was already watching me. Not like a hey, welcome home look, more like she was studying me. I'd come in 10 minutes late because the road was backed up, and she'd be standing in the kitchen with her arms crossed, asking me where I was. And when I'd answer, she wouldn't just take it and move on. She'd hold eye contact for a bit too long, like she was waiting for me to slip up. Then the phone thing started. One night I was on the couch scrolling, and I laughed at some meme my buddy sent me. She was across the room and immediately wanted to know who I was texting. I showed her the screen. She looked at it way too long. I asked if she was good, and she said yeah, but with that cold tone. Every time I overheard her on the phone with her crew, they were talking about cheating. Husbands with second phones. Guys with work wives. Some woman at their gym whose husband had apparently been living a whole other life for 3 years. That group collected cheating stories the way some people collect baseball cards, and the message was always the same. Your husband is probably doing it too. You just haven't caught him yet. There were 2 others in the group besides Courtney. Sydney worked in HR at some healthcare company, the quieter one who wouldn't start a fire, but would absolutely hand someone the matches. Bridget was an ER nurse with 3 kids who lived for gossip and would drive 30 minutes across town to deliver it in person. Courtney sold real estate, which meant she had a flexible schedule and way too much free time. Together, they were one big echo chamber, all drama. And Catherine, who'd always been the type to go all in on her friendships, bought every word of it. The first time Catherine went full interrogation mode on me, I honestly thought she was messing around. I'd stopped at the Giant on Snowden River Parkway to grab stuff for dinner. Regular Friday grocery run. It took me maybe 40 minutes because the place was packed. I walk in with 2 bags of groceries, and she's sitting at the kitchen island, phone face down, staring at me like I just crawled through the window at 2 in the morning. She wanted to know why it took so long. I told her the store was busy. She asked which store. I told her. She asked if I ran into anyone. No. Are you sure? Catherine. Yes, I'm sure. What's going on with you? Yeah, nothing. Now I can't ask questions? This became a daily thing. Who I ate lunch with at work? Why did my meeting run 20 minutes over? Why did some woman from her own friend group supposedly spotted me at a coffee shop with a female coworker? I told her my team grabs coffee together most mornings, and yeah, women work on my team. She didn't push back, but she didn't let it go either. And the follow-ups always came at weird times. I'd think a topic was dead, and then 2 days later she'd bring it back up with a new angle. So that coffee shop you were at, is that the one on the corner or the one near the parking garage? Constantly testing me. The thing that got to me was how calm she was about it. And nothing I said was ever good enough. I could have hooked myself up to a lie detector in the middle of the kitchen, and she still would have found a reason to doubt me. Then one night, I'm getting ready for bed, and her phone lights up on the nightstand. The screen was facing me, and I caught a text from Courtney before it went dark. Something along the lines of, "Did you check his car yet? Don't wait too long. They always cover their tracks." I froze. Didn't say anything. Just laid there staring for minutes, running through what was happening to my marriage. Next morning, before I backed out of the driveway, I got down and ran my hand along the underside of the car near the rear wheel well. Part of me was hoping I'd find nothing, but my fingers hit something small, hard, and magnetic. GPS tracker. Cheap little thing you can buy online for like 60 bucks. I sat there in the driveway for a minute, just holding it. When did we get here? I thought about ripping it off and slamming it on the kitchen counter right then, but something told me not to. If she knew I'd found it, she'd just get more careful. So I put it back exactly where it was, took a photo of it with my phone, and drove to work like nothing happened. That afternoon, I called a divorce lawyer, not to file yet, just to understand my options. The lawyer, a woman named Veronica, told me Maryland is an all-party consent state for recording, that the GPS tracking without consent could constitute stalking under state law, and that if I wanted the strongest possible position, I should document everything, avoid tipping her off, and let the pattern build. That's what I did. I started keeping records. Every accusation, every interrogation, every weird question that came out of nowhere. The tracker stayed on my car. I knew it was there, and I let her think she had the upper hand. Every day she watched my movements on her little app. She was building my case for me. For the next 3 weeks, I got my financial house in order, opened a new checking account at a different bank, and started routing a portion of my direct deposit into it. Nothing that would raise a red flag. Pulled copies of all our financial documents. Mortgage, joint accounts, credit cards, car titles, everything stored in a secure folder she couldn't access. I also went through the last 12 months of credit card statements line by line. That's where I found the tracker purchase. She'd bought it off an electronics site 2 weeks before I found it on my car. The charge was buried between a Target run and a gas station fill-up. Screenshotted it. Only after all that was locked down did I pull the tracker off the car and put it on the counter between us. I asked her to explain. She looked at it, looked at me, and without even blinking told me it was for her peace of mind. Said it wasn't a big deal. Said if I had nothing to hide, I shouldn't care. I told her this was a very big deal, that normal people don't track their spouse's car. She actually rolled her eyes at me, told me I was overreacting and to just let her have this one thing so she could relax. I asked her what I had ever done, in our entire time together, that would make her think she needed to do this. I went through it. Never been late without an explanation. Never hidden my phone. Every single suspicion she had came from something one of her friends said about some other guy in some other marriage that had nothing to do with us. She didn't have an answer for that. She just shook her head like I was the one not getting it, and walked away. I watched her and started thinking to myself, this wasn't the woman I married. That's when I realized this wasn't a marriage problem anymore. And I'd already been building the file for weeks. A few days after the tracker confrontation, I pick up my phone in the morning and there's a new app in my drawer. Some location sharing thing I definitely didn't install. She must have grabbed my phone while I was in the shower. She knew my passcode because I'd shared it with her for years. We had nothing to hide from each other. I screenshotted the app, then went into my phone settings and captured the installed apps list, permissions, and location access showing what the app had been granted. Exported all of it to my secure cloud folder. Then I changed my passcode, reset my biometrics, and turned on login alerts for my accounts. Only after all of that was preserved and locked down did I remove the app. I told Catherine it wasn't okay. She didn't even flinch. If you're not doing anything wrong, why does it matter? Same logic as the tracker. Same dead-end argument. I told her trust goes both ways, and she'd been stomping on it for months. She called me manipulative. Said I was trying to make her feel crazy so I could get away with whatever I was doing. Classic reversal. I logged it and moved on. That week I brought up counseling. Told her we needed to talk to somebody because whatever this was, it was getting worse. She shut it down immediately. Said she didn't need a stranger telling her she was wrong for being worried about her marriage. Said counseling was for people who didn't know what the problem was, and she knew exactly what the problem was. Me. I told her fine, but I wanted it on record that I tried. I sat down with Veronica again and walked her through the full timeline. She told me to keep going. Meanwhile, Catherine started showing up at my job. The first time, she walked into the office around lunch with a bag of food, all smiles, saying she was in the area. I work near Fort Meade. Nobody is in the area by accident, but I played it cool, introduced her to a couple people, and ate lunch with her in the break room. Fine. Now here's how visitor access works at my building. You check in at the front desk, get a visitor badge, and someone escorts you. During her legit visits, she only ever had access to the lobby, the break room, and the hallway between them. She didn't get to roam free. But here's the thing about repeated visits. You start picking up on patterns. She saw the layout of the ground floor. She noticed which doors people used. She watched the shift change timing at the side entrance by the loading dock, where a couple guys on the logistics team would prop the door open to take breaks. If you're paying attention, and Catherine was always paying attention, a few escorted visits is all it takes to learn the building's weak spots. 2 days after the first visit, she showed up again. Then again the next week, always at random times. Never a heads up. She'd come in, look around, ask who was in my office that day, who I had meetings with, whether the woman she saw walking down the hall was someone I worked with. One time she pointed at a post-it note on my monitor with a woman's name and number on it. Vendor rep I'd been trying to schedule a shipment review with. Catherine stared at that post-it like it was Exhibit A. Every visit followed the same pattern. Show up cheerful, scan the room, ask questions. Then she'd leave, and I'd get a text 2 hours later asking about something she noticed while she was there. A jacket on a chair that wasn't mine. A coffee cup with a lipstick mark on someone else's desk. But the real one was when she came in on a Thursday and spent 20 minutes chatting up our receptionist, Jasmine. I didn't even know she was in the building until after she'd left. Jasmine pulled me aside the next morning looking uncomfortable. Said my wife had been asking about my daily schedule, who I eat lunch with, and whether I ever stay late with anyone in particular. She'd framed it all real friendly, but Jasmine said the questions kept getting more specific and it felt off. I thanked Jasmine and asked her to do me a favor. If my wife came back again, I wanted her to inform me right away. She agreed. I also asked her to write down what Catherine had asked about while it was still fresh. She did, and I added it to the file. That night I sat Catherine down and told her the drop-in visits were done. That people at my job were noticing, and it was making everyone uncomfortable. She hit me with, "You should be grateful I want to see my husband at work. A good husband would be grateful, and a good wife wouldn't be interrogating the receptionist behind her husband's back." She didn't have a comeback for that one. Just went quiet, stood up, and went to bed without a word. But I knew she wasn't done. Now here's the thing. Defense contracting firms aren't regular offices. We handle government contracts, some involving controlled program data and sensitive operational information, security clearances, restricted access areas, badge protocols, cameras everywhere. You don't just stroll in and wander around. Security violations, even minor ones, get treated like major incidents. Like I said, during her escorted visits, Catherine never had unsupervised access beyond the lobby and break room, but she'd seen the building's rhythm. She knew about the side door by the loading dock and the shift change habit. That door wasn't supposed to stay propped open, but it did. And Catherine observed everything. So when my boss Keith called me into his office on a Tuesday, and I saw his face, I knew right away something bad had happened. He told me that over the weekend, the security team reviewed footage and flagged an incident. A woman had gotten into the building through that side door during the shift change window. She bypassed the main entrance where visitor check-in happened, went to the second floor, spent about 12 minutes around my office area, and left through the same door. She was wearing a cap and kept her head turned away from the main hallway cameras, but the stairwell camera got her face clean. The second floor where I sit is the admin side. Open office layout, no badge doors. The controlled program areas are deeper in the building behind their own access points. She didn't need to breach a vault to do damage. She just needed to get close enough. My stomach dropped. Keith wasn't done. Security did a sweep of my workspace after they identified the breach and found a small device mounted under my desk. GPS and audio recorder combo. The kind that connects to a phone app so you can listen in remotely. My wife had broken into a defense contractor's facility and planted a surveillance device in my office. I'm not going to pretend I played it cool in that moment. My hands were shaking. I was angry. She could blow up my entire career. Keith leaned forward. "Neil, I need you to understand where this is headed. HR and the security director are already looped in. Legal's involved. They're talking about filing a formal complaint with law enforcement." I took a breath and told him I'd been documenting this behavior for weeks and that I already had a lawyer. He looked surprised, but also relieved. Before I left his office, Keith told me the security team needed to interview me. Standard protocol. They had to verify I wasn't involved, that I hadn't given her access or tipped her off about the side door. I sat in a room for about an hour answering questions about my marriage and my workspace. They pulled my laptop and work phone for a 48-hour review. I walked out and called Veronica, told her everything. She told me to file a police report that afternoon and request a protective order immediately. I drove to the police station on my lunch break, gave my statement, showed them the log, the tracker photos, the screenshots, the credit card records. The officer taking my report ooked at the file and said that was going to make the detective's job a lot easier. I also filed the petition for a protective order, got an interim order through a commissioner that same day. Within a few days, I had a temporary protective order hearing in front of a judge, and the final hearing was scheduled about a week after service. Veronica handled the filings and made sure nothing slipped through the cracks. When I got home, Catherine was on the couch. She could tell something was off. I didn't ease into it. Asked her flat out if she went to my office over the weekend. For about half a second, I saw the mask slip. Then she caught herself. "What are you talking about?" You're on camera, Catherine. They found the device. She went pale, stood up, then tried to justify it. Said I forced her hand. That if I'd just been open with her, she never would have had to go that far. That she did it because she loved me and needed to know the truth. You broke into a building that handles government contracts. You planted surveillance equipment next to a room where restricted program briefings happen. Do you understand what you've done? They're not going to do anything, Neil. Come on. Nobody's going to come after a wife for looking out for her marriage. I already filed the police report, and I have a protective order in place. It's already been granted. Her whole face changed. She started panicking. You did what? I also have a lawyer. Have had one for a while now, and I've been documenting everything. Every tracker, every interrogation, every time you showed up at my job, every app you installed on my phone while I was in the shower. All of it. She didn't say anything for a long time. Just stood there processing. I'm filing for divorce, I said. Papers will be ready by end of week. She started shaking, tears coming. Neil, please, don't rush things like this. I got caught up in what they were saying, and I know, and I'm done with this circus. She tried to keep talking. Brought up our wedding, our first apartment back in Pennsylvania, the road trip we took to the Outer Banks. She went through every good memory we had like she was reading from a list, trying to bury what she'd done. And honestly, part of me wanted to let it work. I'm not made of stone. There was a version of this woman that I'd been in love with for years, and hearing her bring up all those memories hit harder than I expected. But then I remembered the tracker under my car, the app on my phone, the receptionist looking at me sideways, the device under my desk, and I knew that the woman standing in front of me crying wasn't the same one from those memories. That person was gone. Maybe she'd come back someday, but it wasn't going to be while I was still standing there waiting. I went upstairs and started packing. I was out 3 days later. This all went down last year, about 18 months into living here. From the first tracker on my car to the break-in at my office was about 4 months. Moved into a one-bedroom in Ellicott City that I'd already scouted weeks earlier. Had the lease lined up, my finances separated, my documents secured, and my legal strategy mapped out. The whole move took half a day. Now here's where it gets interesting. Because Catherine's first move after I left was to run to everyone she knew and start spinning her version. Told them I was cruel, that I was overreacting, that I was punishing her for a mistake any worried wife could have made. She cast herself as the devoted wife whose husband walked out the second things got hard. And some people bought it. I got texts from people I hadn't talked to in weeks telling me I was being too harsh. One guy actually told me Catherine probably just read too many articles online and I should cut her some slack. Another one, a mutual friend from back in Pennsylvania, sent me a message saying I was ruining her life over something that could have been a conversation. Like I hadn't tried having that conversation 6 different times. A woman from her fitness group sent me a whole paragraph about how marriage takes work and how men need to be more emotionally available. Never met me, didn't know a single thing about the situation, but she felt qualified to weigh in anyway. And then there was this guy from our old neighborhood who told me she was just scared and that I should be a man about it and forgive her. Be a man about it. As if letting someone stalk you and saying nothing is what men are supposed to do. I sent them all the same message, that they were welcome to believe whatever version they wanted, but the facts were documented, the footage existed, and I wasn't going to apologize for refusing to be stalked by my own wife. Then I blocked every single one of them. Now, the divorce is where things really shifted. Catherine's mistake was assuming I'd roll over, split everything down the middle, walk away clean just to make it stop. She even told her lawyer she expected a straightforward settlement because, and this is a direct quote from the filing, no children were involved and the finances were relatively straightforward. Veronica came in with receipts. Literally. I filed no fault. Maryland overhauled its divorce framework a couple years back, so you don't need to prove fault just to get divorced anymore. But just because the divorce itself is no fault doesn't mean her conduct disappears from the equation. The stalking, the surveillance, the break-in, the active criminal case, all of that gave us massive leverage in settlement negotiation. It factored into the protective order, into whether alimony was even on the table. And it made her side very motivated to settle quickly before any of this got aired out in open court. First, the relocation. I'd moved us to Maryland for my career, but I'd also covered the moving costs, the security deposit on the house, and the first 3 months of the mortgage solo, while Catherine was still getting settled and not working. Those costs were documented to the dollar. Second, the criminal exposure. Catherine was staring down an active criminal case connected to the same person she was trying to negotiate a settlement with. Her lawyer knew that if this went to a contested hearing, every piece of evidence I had would come out, and none of it made his client look like someone a judge would want to reward. Third, and this was the big one, Veronica argued that Catherine's criminal behavior had directly jeopardized my security clearance, which is basically my entire livelihood in the defense industry. If I'd lost that clearance because of her stunt, I'd have been done. Not just at this company, in the entire field. That argument carried real weight. Catherine's side tried to push back, argued she'd made sacrifices relocating, that she deserved equitable distribution. Her lawyer submitted a statement saying Catherine had been manipulated by toxic friendships and was in emotional crisis at the time, and that a punitive outcome would be disproportionate. Veronica responded with the full timeline I'd been building for months. Every logged accusation, every documented drop-in, the tracking app screenshots, Jasmine's email, the credit card records, everything. And the kicker, Catherine's own suspicious observations note from her phone, which came out during discovery. Her lawyer had to hand it over because we'd requested all communications related to surveillance activity. I was sitting across the table in mediation when Veronica slid it over to Catherine's lawyer. He picked it up, started reading, and his face went flat. Page after page of surveillance logs, dates, details, names of women she'd spotted at my office. He set it down, leaned over to Catherine, and whispered something. She wouldn't look at me for the rest of the session. The emotional crisis argument didn't hold up. Neither did a clean 50-50 when she hadn't contributed to the mortgage for nearly a year and was facing criminal charges connected to the person she was asking to split assets with. We settled to avoid dragging it out further. I didn't get everything I wanted. Nobody does in divorce. But the agreement protected the big stuff. I kept the house. Her share of marital equity was a fixed buyout amount, and it wasn't much given her lack of contribution during the marriage's final stretch. My retirement stayed largely untouched since it was mostly premarital contributions, and no alimony. Between the active criminal case, her conduct, and the fact that she'd chosen not to work for the better part of a year, there was no basis for ongoing support, and her side didn't push it. Her lawyer made one last play requesting I cover her legal fees since she was financially disadvantaged. Veronica pointed to the credit card statements showing $4,000 in charges at restaurants and boutiques over 3 months during the same period she wasn't paying the mortgage. That request went nowhere. It wasn't about taking everything from her. It was about protecting what I'd built and making sure I wasn't funding the consequences of her own decisions. While the divorce was playing out, the company's case against her was running on a parallel track, and that one was even more brutal. Their legal team laid everything out clean. Security footage, the device, purchase records, visitor logs, camera timestamps, and then the receipts. When the investigators pulled her purchase history, they found she hadn't just bought the one GPS tracker I found on my car. She'd bought 3 separate tracking devices total. The car tracker, the audio GPS combo she planted in my office, and a third one that nobody had accounted for yet. That third one is what got me. After the purchase records came out showing 3 devices, Veronica told me to do a full sweep of everything I owned. Every bag, every jacket, every piece of gear, the car trunk, all of it. I went through it all that night, checking every pocket and lining. Found it in my gym bag, tucked into a small pocket in the lining that I never use. I didn't touch it with my bare hands, put it in a Ziploc bag, and turned it over to the police the next morning as physical evidence tied to the existing case. That one had been active for almost 2 months. I thought about all the times she'd casually ask how the gym was, and now I realized she already knew the answer before I opened my mouth. She was testing whether I'd lie, every single time. The tracking data showed she'd been cross-referencing my gym visits to check whether I was actually going where I said I was going. She'd built an actual spreadsheet matching my movements against what I'd told her my plans were for each day. The amount of time and energy she poured into this was honestly disturbing. Catherine's lawyer tried to frame the whole thing as a marital dispute that got out of hand, argued she was a concerned wife acting out of emotional distress, not a criminal. He even brought up that Courtney's own marriage ended due to infidelity, suggesting Catherine had been primed to see threats that weren't there. Decent angle. But the evidence was too heavy. The company's security director got up and explained what that audio device could have picked up. My office sits right next to a conference room where controlled program briefings happen. If that thing had been running during certain meetings, it could have captured information covered by federal contract security requirements. Device records audio. Audio transmits to a phone app. That data now exists on a personal device with no clearance, outside any protected system. Whether Catherine intended to capture controlled information or not didn't matter. The exposure existed, and in the defense world, that's all it takes. The company didn't view this as a personal thing. They saw it as a breach of their security protocols and contract obligations. Now here's how this side played out. The prosecutor initially pursued charges including illegal interception and recording of communication, planting an audio device and remotely listening in falls under Maryland's wiretap laws, and that's felony territory, up to 5 years and serious fines. Her lawyer fought hard to keep that off the table. In the end, she pled down. Misdemeanor trespassing and stalking, in exchange for probation, community service, and strict no contact and no trespass terms. Even though it landed as a misdemeanor, the exposure had been serious. Maryland stalking carries up to 5 years even as a misdemeanor. The plea deal was designed to avoid far worse outcomes, and even that left her with a permanent record. The company also pursued a separate civil case for the full cost of the security audit they had to run after the breach, plus additional damages. That settled on its own terms, and she's paying for it. The company issued a formal no trespass order, and my protective order covered the workplace as a named location. The case got continued once because her lawyer asked for more time, which dragged the whole thing out another 6 weeks. The company pushed hard for the full judgment on the record to set a precedent. Catherine was the example. And the friends? That crew who started the whole thing? Scattered. Every single one. Courtney, the ringleader, ghosted her the second the legal stuff got real. Turns out Courtney was the one who sent Catherine the link to the specific GPS tracker. She sent it in their group chat with instructions on how to install it without getting caught. When the heat came, Courtney deleted the whole chat and blocked Catherine's number. What she didn't know was that Catherine had already forwarded several of those conversations to her own email months earlier, back when she was building her case against me. Those messages showed Courtney coaching Catherine on where to hide the tracker and telling her to check my office because that's where they always slip up. Catherine's lawyer turned them over during discovery, trying to prove outside influence as a mitigating factor. Backfired. All it did was create a documented trail showing the whole thing was premeditated and coordinated. Sydney and Bridget unfollowed her on everything within days. Not one of them showed up to a single hearing. These women had spent months pumping Catherine full of paranoia, and the second any of it landed on a court docket, they were gone. Her parents found out through the legal filings. Her dad called me one evening, and I could hear it in his voice before he finished his first sentence. "Neil, is all of this true? The break-in, the tracking, the charges?" "Yes, sir, all of it." He went quiet for a long time. Then he said he was sorry, that he and Catherine's mom had tried to warn her about that friend group months ago, and she wouldn't hear it. I told him I appreciated the call and didn't hold anything against him. From what I heard later, her parents confronted her about everything, told her to own it, to face what she'd done. She didn't, doubled down, kept insisting I must have been hiding something, and that she'd been right to investigate. Her mom broke down during the conversation. That's when they stopped taking her calls. So there was Catherine. No husband, no friends, no family willing to pick up the phone, unfavorable divorce settlement, criminal record, restitution payments, and not a single person left who was willing to pretend she was the victim. And me? I'm writing this from my apartment in Ellicott City, 7 months removed from all of it. Got a lease that's mine, a job that's solid, and a life that actually feels good and peaceful again. I started hitting the gym without a tracker hidden in my bag. Reconnected with a couple old buddies back in Pennsylvania over the phone, something I'd let slip during the worst months because I didn't have the energy to talk to anyone. Even started coaching youth flag football on Saturday mornings through the Howard County Rec program. My coworkers noticed something too. My security clearance review went through clean, which was a weight off my shoulders I can't even describe. One wrong finding and everything I'd built would have been gone because of what she did. But all those months of documenting paid off. I also did something a lot of people told me not to do. I went after Courtney. I didn't sue her, but I made sure her role in this didn't just disappear into the background. When Courtney deleted that group chat, she thought she'd cleaned the slate, but those forwarded emails from Discovery had her name all over them. Every coaching message, every tracker recommendation, all sitting in court records. I had Veronica send a cease and desist to Courtney, letting her know she'd been identified in court filings in connection with the stalking and surveillance against me, and that any further contact would result in a civil action. The letter referenced the specific messages where she'd coached Catherine on tracker placement and encouraged the break-in. She never responded. But she also stopped showing up in any mutual spaces, scrubbed her social media of anything connected to Catherine, and blocked me on everything. Message received. Last thing about Catherine. I heard through her dad a couple months after everything was finalized that she'd moved back to Pennsylvania, living with a cousin outside of Pittsburgh. Couldn't find work in Howard County because the criminal record kept showing up on background checks. In an area where half the workforce is cleared or adjacent to cleared jobs, that's a career death sentence. People still come at me sometimes. Tell me I went too far. That pressing charges on my wife was cold. That I should have handled it quietly, given her one more chance. Maybe, but every chance I gave her, she used it to make things worse. Every boundary I set, she crossed it and came back for more. I didn't want to blow up my marriage. She did that. I just made sure it didn't take me down with it. She made her choices. I made mine. And I'd make the same ones tomorrow. Guys, we are so close to hit 100,000 subscribers on this channel. If you are not subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing. It really helps hit that 100,000 mark. Thanks for making this dream come true. My uncle gave our family business to his son. When I confronted him, he snapped, "Your dad's gone. Be grateful I kept you on payroll." I just smiled and said, "Sure, we'll see about that." Sup, Reddit. Buckle up because this one's intense. If you've never been to Midland, Odessa, picture this. Flat dirt in every direction, pump jacks nodding like tired old men, and enough dust to turn a white truck brown by lunchtime. The whole Permian Basin runs on diesel, desperation, and guys who will answer the phone at 2 in the morning when a generator dies on a lease road 20 miles from the nearest gas station. I'm one of those guys. Or I was, anyway. Now I'm the guy who signs the checks. I'm Jace, 27 male, and for the last 7 years, I've been the backbone of my family's mobile fleet service company. Burnt knuckles, no sleep, and a toolbox that weighed more than most people's furniture. I've slept in the cab of our service truck between midnight callouts with my boots still on because taking them off felt like tempting fate out here. I've changed injectors in horizontal rain at 3 a.m., while a rig foreman stood behind me with a flashlight, chain smoking, and asking every 90 seconds if I was almost done. I've bled on more engines than I can count. The Permian doesn't care about your feelings. It cares about uptime. And I delivered uptime like my life depended on it, because for a long time, I thought my future did. Last winter, a parts order came in wrong for the 3rd time on a job I was already behind on. I threw a wrench across the shop bay hard enough to dent the wall. Mike, our shop foreman, didn't even flinch. He just looked at the dent and said, "Feel better?" I didn't. But 20 minutes later, I was back under that truck finishing the job because that's what needed to happen. What I didn't know was that my uncle had been running a different kind of operation in the office. The kind where my name ended up on documents I never signed, my social security number got used without my knowledge, and my inherited ownership stake got treated like it didn't exist, until I made sure it did. I know. It's kind of confusing. That's why I should give you the full picture first. Briggs Equipment Services was started by my dad, Arthur, and his brother Gerald about 15 years ago. They set it up as an LLC, 50-50 ownership split right down the middle. The idea was simple. Oilfield support companies need their equipment running. Diesel trucks, generators, pump trailers, all the stuff that keeps a job site running. When something breaks in the field, you can't tow it to a dealership and wait 2 weeks. You need somebody on site, fast, with the right parts and the knowledge to get it done. That was our niche. Mobile fleet service and maintenance for the companies that kept the rigs running. My dad built the reputation. He was a mechanic first, a people person second, and a businessman somewhere around 5th or 6th. Arthur Briggs was the guy who'd drive out to a well site in a hailstorm because he told a client he'd be there by 6 and that was that. Clients trusted him because he showed up, did clean work, and never oversold. He was reliable, and in the oil field, reliable is worth more than clever. My uncle Gerald was the opposite. He handled the office side, banking, vendor accounts, insurance, contracts, basically everything that wasn't a wrench. He was smooth, good with numbers, better with people who had money. He wore pressed shirts to work, while the rest of us smelled like diesel and hydraulic fluid. Gerald could talk to a bank loan officer the same way he talked to a pastor, and you'd believe every word both times. My dad trusted him completely with that side of the business, because my dad hated paperwork the way most people hate traffic. That's why Gerald was listed as the managing member on all the official documents. My dad wanted to turn wrenches, not push paper. Dad died 2 years ago. Heart attack on a Sunday morning. No warning, no goodbye, just gone. I was 25 and suddenly half owner of a company I'd been working at since I was 16. The operating agreement was clear. Dad's 50% membership interest passed to me as his sole beneficiary. The agreement said if a member died, their share went to their heir automatically once the estate stuff was done. Gerald couldn't block me even if he wanted to. On paper, I was Gerald's equal partner. In reality, Gerald acted like I was still the kid who used to sweep the shop floor. The day after the funeral, Gerald pulled me aside in the office. He put his hand on my shoulder, looked me in the eye, and told me the best thing I could do for the company was keep doing exactly what I'd been doing. Stay in the field. Keep the clients happy. Let him handle the business side because that's what Arthur would have wanted. He said it with this tone like he was doing me a favor, protecting me from the burden of responsibility. I was grieving. I was tired. I said, okay. That was my first mistake. I started working for the company the summer after I turned 16. Grunt work at first, cleaning the shop, organizing inventory, riding along on service calls to learn. By 18, I was handling basic diagnostics on my own. By 20, I was running solo field calls. By 22, I was the guy they sent when nobody else could figure it out. The complicated stuff. The jobs where downtime was costing a client thousands per hour, and somebody needed to show up, figure it out fast, and get it done. My cousin Theo, Gerald's son, came into the business around the same time I did. But Theo's path looked nothing like mine. While I was out in the field getting sunburnt and greasy, Theo was in the office. Learning the business, his dad called it. What that actually meant was Theo sat in on client meetings, went to industry lunches, attended the networking events in Midland, where guys in clean boots talked about margins and market share. He got business cards before he could change a fuel filter. I got a pager and a list of emergency contacts. Theo wasn't stupid. He could talk. He had his dad's smoothness and this way of repeating things he'd heard in meetings like they were his own ideas. He'd drop phrases like operational efficiency and strategic alignment into conversations with guys who had 30 years of diesel grease under their nails. The floor guys would nod politely and then look at each other the second he walked away. There was one week that summed up the whole arrangement. Theo flew to Houston for a 3-day oilfield services conference. The company paid. Hotel, meals, registration, the whole package. He came back with a lanyard full of business cards and a head full of buzzwords. That same week, I pulled back-to-back 16-hour shifts because 2 of our clients had simultaneous equipment failures during a cold snap that knocked out half the generators in the basin. I slept in my truck one of those nights because driving home and back would have cost me 2 hours I didn't have. When we both showed up to the shop that Friday, Gerald asked Theo how the conference went. He didn't ask me anything. Theo spent the next 2 days dropping asset utilization rate into every conversation. One of the older techs asked me what that meant. I told him it meant Theo went to a hotel with a pool. After Dad died, it got worse. Gerald started positioning Theo as the heir apparent to the whole operation, not just his half. Company emails went out with Theo's name on operational updates. Client communications started coming from Theo's account. Gerald introduced Theo at industry events as the next generation of Briggs leadership. Singular. Like I didn't exist. Like I didn't own half the company. The credit stealing got worse as Theo's leadership role expanded. I was in the shop one afternoon when I overheard him on a call with a client who'd mentioned the fast turnaround on a late-night generator repair. His office door was open, and his voice carried. "That's what we pride ourselves on," Theo said, leaning back in his chair like a guy who'd earned the right. Quick response. Minimal downtime. It's baked into our culture. Our culture. No mention of who actually drove 45 minutes in the dark, diagnosed a wiring harness failure by headlamp, and had the unit back online before the morning crew arrived. That was just we. When things went right, it was the Briggs team. When things went wrong, it found its way to my phone. The Permian Logistics situation was the one that really burned. Permian Logistics was our single biggest account, nearly a third of annual revenue, and I'd been their primary point of contact since the day they signed. They had a fleet of service trucks that kept throwing check engine codes, intermittent stuff, the kind of problem that makes you want to rip your hair out because it never acts up when you're actually looking at it. I spent 3 weekends in a row going through their trucks one by one, tracing wiring, swapping sensors, running diagnostics until I finally tracked it to a batch of faulty ECM connectors from a bad supplier shipment. I kept records of everything. My hands were cracked from degreaser by the 3rd weekend. I had connector diagrams spread across my kitchen table at midnight like a guy planning a heist. Wrote up a report with part numbers, failure patterns, and a recommended replacement schedule. Theo took that report to the next client meeting. He presented it as a fleet health analysis he'd been working on. The operations manager, a guy named Dale who'd been calling me directly for years, emailed afterward thanking Theo for his thoroughness. Gerald forwarded that email company-wide with the subject line, "This is what client leadership looks like." That same afternoon, Gerald stopped Theo in the hallway where 3 of us could hear it. He clapped Theo on the shoulder and said, "That Permian Logistics email? That's the kind of relationship management that keeps this company growing. Good work." Theo nodded like he'd just closed a Fortune 500 deal. I was standing 10 feet away with hydraulic fluid on my shirt. Gerald didn't look at me. Mike was beside me rebuilding a valve assembly. He waited until Gerald walked back to his office, then said without looking up, 3 weekends. That's what that report cost you. 3 weekends. I didn't say anything. He wasn't asking me to. Gerald never did any of it where you could call him out directly. The real cuts happened in smaller moments. Once, after I'd landed us a referral from a satisfied client, something that should have been a win, Gerald pulled me aside in the shop hallway. He put his hand on my shoulder, smiled, and said, "That's great, Jace, really. But there's a difference between reliability and leadership. Your reliability, Theo's leadership. Both matter." He said it like he was giving me a compliment. That one stuck with me. The worst instance was during a quarterly meeting I'd actually been invited to for. I'd put together ideas for expanding our preventive maintenance contracts, real numbers, projected revenue, client retention data I'd pulled together on my own time. I was halfway through explaining it when Gerald cut me off. He put his hand up, smiled at the room, and said, "Jace, buddy, we love your energy, but you're a wrench guy, and that's a compliment. Let the business side handle the business side." I sat there feeling like someone had just patted me on the head in front of the entire room. Whenever I brought up wanting more involvement in company decisions, Gerald would lean back in his chair, smile, and redirect it. He'd say things like, "Jace, we need you in the field. You're too valuable to pull out. Theo handles the client side. It's division of labor." And it sounded logical, even though the logic was designed to keep me exactly where Gerald wanted me. Useful, invisible, and nowhere near anything that mattered. After that quarterly meeting, something shifted in me. I was still angry, sure, but under that, I started paying attention differently, watching how decisions got made, who benefited, and where the money actually went. And the more I watched, the more I realized that Gerald had spent years building a structure where Theo got the visibility, the credit, and the relationships while I got the callouts, the liability, and the exhaustion. The first thing I did was pull out the operating agreement, the actual document, not Gerald's interpretation of it. I'd barely looked at it after Dad died. Gerald had handled all the estate transition stuff, told me everything was in order, and I trusted him. Stupid. The operating agreement was clear on a bunch of stuff Gerald had conveniently never mentioned. As a 50% member, I could inspect the books. I was supposed to get quarterly financials. I had a vote on major decisions, loans, asset sales, changes to the agreement. I could call a members' meeting, none of which Gerald had ever offered or honored. I started documenting everything. Decisions Gerald made without consulting me, financial statements I never received, every time Theo was positioned as the sole future of a company I half-owned. I kept notes in a composition book I bought at the gas station. Nothing digital that could be accessed from the company network. The first person I talked to was Mike. We were in the shop after hours. I was helping him finish a brake job on one of the service trucks, and I just said it out loud. I told him something was wrong with how Gerald was running things, and I was going to find out what. Mike didn't look up from what he was doing. He finished torquing a caliper bolt, set the wrench down, and said he'd been waiting 2 years for me to figure that out. Then he told me something that stuck. He said the clients didn't call Briggs Equipment Services. They called Jace, and he said my dad would have wanted me to protect what he built, not watch Gerald strip it for parts. Mike was doing his own quiet observations too. Without me asking, he'd been keeping mental notes on things that didn't add up. Vendor prices that seemed high. New suppliers nobody in the shop had ever heard of. Parts orders that came through the office instead of through the normal channels he'd built over 12 years. He told me he couldn't prove anything, but the numbers felt off. I found an attorney in Midland who specialized in business disputes. I showed him the operating agreement, my inheritance documents, and my notes. He looked it over for about 20 minutes and then looked up at me. He told me Gerald had been operating outside the agreement for 2 years. No financial disclosures to me as a member. No consultation on major decisions. No members' meetings. At minimum, I had grounds to demand a full accounting of company finances going back to my father's death. The attorney told me to keep documenting and to request the financial records formally in writing. I sent the letter the next week. Certified mail, return receipt requested. Formal demand for inspection of books and records pursuant to my rights under the operating agreement. Listed everything. Financial statements, bank records, loan documents, vendor contracts, insurance policies, tax returns. I gave Gerald 30 days to comply. Gerald called me that evening. His voice was calm, but there was something underneath it. He asked why I was sending legal letters instead of just talking to him. Said we were family. I told him I'd been trying to talk to him for 2 years, and he'd been treating me like an employee instead of an owner. I told him I wanted to see the books. That was it. He went quiet for a few seconds. Then he said something I'll never forget. "Be grateful I let you work here. We don't owe you anything. Let me work here, at the company my father built, that I own half of. Let me." "Gerald," I said, "you're going to give me those records, one way or another." The call came on a Thursday afternoon, about 2 weeks after I'd sent the demand letter. I was under the hood of a Kenworth service truck replacing a turbo actuator when my phone buzzed. Kara Whitfield, relationship manager at Basin West Bank. She handled commercial lending for oilfield service companies. Smart, direct, zero tolerance for nonsense. "Just confirming some details on the file," she said. "You're listed as a key operator on the equipment financing and the revolving credit line. The underwriting references you specifically." I told her that sounded right. I was the primary field operations person. "There's also a personal guarantee rider, with what appears to be your signature, she said, pledging personal liability for the company's revolving credit facility. Your name, your social security number? I went still. A personal guarantee writer? Correct. Not a staffing form. Not an operational acknowledgement. A personal guarantee pledging your personal assets as collateral for company debt. When was that signed? I asked. She gave me a date from about 18 months ago, 6 months after my dad died. During what Gerald had called a routine bank renewal. The bank had rerun everything after Dad's death to update the account structure, and Gerald played it off like standard paperwork. Kara, I never signed a personal guarantee for anything. The line went dead quiet. I could almost hear her recalculating on the other end. That's noted, she said carefully. I'm going to need to flag this for internal review. We'll need to pull the full submission trail on that document. I'll be in touch. I stood in that shop bay for I don't know how long. My hands were shaking, and it wasn't from the cold. For 18 months, my name had been attached to the company's debt. If the company defaulted, I could be personally on the hook for hundreds of thousands of dollars. And Gerald had done it after my dad died, when he thought I was too grief-blind to notice. I called Kara back within the hour and asked how the guarantee had been submitted. She pulled the file and told me the document had come through as part of a renewal package submitted electronically from the company's main office email. A DocuSign envelope initiated by Gerald's account. My signature block had been pre-populated. The completion record showed the envelope was signed from the same IP address as Gerald's other submissions, not from my phone, not from my email, not from any device I'd ever used. Kara said she was noting all of this. I didn't go home. I drove straight to my attorney's office and waited in the lobby until he could see me. He listened to everything. He said, "That's fraud," and started outlining what we needed to document. Then he told me this changed the entire situation. Forging a personal guarantee wasn't just a breach of the operating agreement. It was potentially criminal, and it gave me leverage. We drafted 2 letters that night. The first was a formal dispute to Basin West Bank, challenging the guarantee's authenticity and demanding they produce the original document plus the full electronic submission trail. The second letter went to Gerald. It wasn't a request anymore. It was a demand. Produce all financial records within 10 days. Acknowledge in writing that the personal guarantee was submitted without my knowledge or consent, and schedule a members' meeting to address my concerns about company management. The letter made clear that failure to comply would result in legal action, including a petition to the court for appointment of a receiver to oversee company operations pending resolution. I also filed a police report, not because I expected them to arrest Gerald tomorrow, but because I wanted it documented. I pulled my credit report that night at my kitchen table at 1 in the morning. Hard inquiries I didn't recognize, new accounts I never opened, I checked for all of it. Came back clean, no surprises. But the fact that I had to sit there scanning every line, wondering what else my uncle might have done with my social security number, was a feeling I wouldn't wish on anyone. Gerald's response came 3 days later. Not compliance, counterattack. He sent a letter through his own attorney claiming that I had verbally authorized him to handle all banking matters on behalf of the company, that the guarantee was standard business practice, and that my sudden hostility was creating operational disruption that could harm the company. He also claimed that my field performance had been declining, and that he was considering whether my continued involvement was in the company's best interest. My attorney read it and actually laughed. He told me Gerald was bluffing. You can't verbally authorize someone to forge your signature on a financial document. That's not how it works. And threatening to remove a 50% owner because they caught you committing fraud? That was desperation dressed up in legal letterhead. We responded by filing a motion for emergency injunctive relief. The motion asked the court to freeze major company decisions, compel production of financial records, and prohibit Gerald from removing me from company operations. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks out. In the meantime, the bank pressure started building. Basin West's response to my dispute landed in their legal department, and they flagged the company's credit file for internal review. The DocuSign audit trail confirmed everything Kara had told me. The bank placed an administrative hold on the revolving credit line pending full resolution of the guarantee dispute. In banking terms, that meant the renewal couldn't process, and without the renewal, the credit line had a ticking clock. For a company that used that credit line to float equipment purchases, parts inventory, and payroll during slow months, even a temporary hold was bad news. Meanwhile, I stopped working unpaid overtime. No more midnight callouts. No more picking up the phone at 2 a.m. because a foreman was panicking about a dead generator on a lease road. No more covering for gaps in the schedule because Theo couldn't manage dispatch. If a call came in after hours, I forwarded it to the office line. If a job wasn't on my official schedule, I didn't touch it. Everything went through proper channels, documented, time-stamped, by the book. I wasn't sabotaging anything. I was working my actual job. Turns out my actual job had been propped up by about 30 hours a week of free labor I was no longer giving them. The systems I'd built had enough momentum to coast for a few days, but coasting doesn't last when the engine stops pushing. By the end of the first week, cracks appeared. A client called about an emergency crane truck repair holding up a pad site. Theo dispatched a junior tech. The kid couldn't diagnose the problem, called Theo for guidance, and Theo couldn't help because Theo had never worked on a crane truck in his life. 4 hours of downtime on a pad site running 5 figures a day. The client called me directly that night. I told him all service requests needed to go through the main office and gave him the number. He laughed. Mike pulled me aside the next day, not to give me a pep talk, to show me something concrete. He'd been watching the internal schedule board. Theo had double-booked techs 3 times, sent wrong parts to 2 jobs, and promised turnaround times that were physically impossible. But the scheduling failures weren't what Mike wanted me to see. He pulled out his phone and showed me a text thread with one of our parts vendors. The vendor rep had asked Mike directly whether the company was going through changes, because Theo had told him I was transitioning out of the company and that new operational leadership was taking over. Mike had also heard the same story from a client's fleet coordinator who'd called the shop asking for me. They were already rewriting the narrative, framing my exit as voluntary, so nobody asked why the guy who actually ran the operation was suddenly gone, and setting it up so I'd take the blame for leaving instead of them for driving me out. Gerald tried damage control with the bank. He scheduled a meeting with Kara to present a revised credit application removing my name. But removing me didn't just change a form. It changed the risk profile. Without a credible key operator with my track record, the bank's underwriting model looked worse. Theo tried to position himself as the replacement key operator, but his resume was lunches and LinkedIn posts. Kara told Gerald the revised terms reflected the company's current operational profile: higher rate, lower limit, additional collateral. That was banker language for, prove you can survive without the guy you just lost. Because right now, we don't believe you can. It happened on a Wednesday, about a week after Theo's scheduling failures started piling up. Permian Logistics had a hauler, a Peterbilt 389, pulling a lowboy trailer loaded with a Cat 289D skid steer, running equipment from a completed pad site to a new location 40 miles south on 385. The truck's diesel particulate filter flagged a Regan fault 15 miles into the haul. The driver pulled over on the shoulder because the engine was derating, losing power fast. He called Permian Logistics Dispatch. Dispatch called Briggs Equipment Services. Theo took the call. If I'd taken that call, it would have been a 90-minute fix. Senior tech, DPF, specific toolkit, swap the pressure sensor roadside, force a manual region, done. I'd handled that exact job on Permian Logistics trucks a dozen times. I knew their fleet inside out. Theo dispatched Cal, one of the junior techs, but sent him with a general service kit instead of DPF-specific tooling because Theo didn't know the difference. Cal got on scene, couldn't pull the right fault codes without the proper diagnostic software, and called Theo for guidance. Theo told him to clear the codes and try a manual region. Cal couldn't initiate one without the right interface tool. He called Theo back. Theo told him to stand by. That truck sat on the shoulder of 385 for 6 hours. 6. The lowboy was half on the shoulder, half in the lane, just enough to make every trucker on 385 furious. A county sheriff showed up after hour 3, walked up to the driver's window and said, "You've got about 45 minutes to get this rig moving or I'm calling a wrecker. Your choice." Permian had their own wrecker service on standby, but dispatch told the sheriff they were waiting on Briggs to finish the diagnosis before making a call. By hour 4, Cal was standing on the shoulder in a safety vest, waving traffic with one hand and holding his phone with the other, trying to get Theo to pick up. The kid looked like he was about to throw up. The driver called Dale. Dale called Briggs. Theo said they were working on it. Dale called again 2 hours later. Theo didn't answer. Dale called a third time and got the office voicemail. That's 3 calls from your biggest client going unanswered while their truck sits dead on a state highway with a loaded lowboy and a sheriff threatening impound. The skid steer on the lowboy was due at the new pad site that morning for foundation work. The missed delivery triggered a delay penalty clause in Permian Logistics' contract with the drilling operator, $1,000 for every hour past the delivery window. By the time a second tech arrived with the right equipment, it was dark. By the time that skid steer finally arrived the next morning, Permian Logistics was staring at over $22,000 in penalty charges because a DPF sensor job that should have taken 90 minutes turned into an all-day disaster. Dale called me that evening. Not Theo, not Gerald, me. "Jace." His voice was flat. Already made up his mind. "What's up?" I said. "22,000 in penalty charges because your cousin sent a kid with the wrong toolbox to a DPF job and then stopped answering his phone." He paused. I've been patient through the slow responses, the scheduling issues, the drop in quality. But this one's done. I told him I understood. Then I told him something I hadn't told any client yet. I told him there was a legal dispute happening at the company, that I was asserting my ownership rights, and that the situation was going to resolve one way or another in the next few weeks. Dale was quiet for a few seconds. Then he said, "Jace, I don't care about your family situation. I care about my trucks running. You tell me when you're the one making decisions, and we'll talk. Until then, I'm looking at other options." 2 days later, Permian Logistics sent formal written notice. The contract was suspended immediately pending a service capability review with a 60-day termination clause. In the oil field, that's a death certificate. The hearing happened 2 weeks after we filed, right on schedule. My attorney presented the evidence: the forged guarantee, the DocuSign trail, Gerald's failure to provide financial record, the pattern of excluding me from decisions I had a legal right to participate in. Gerald's attorney tried to argue that I was a disgruntled employee trying to disrupt a family business, but the judge wasn't having it. The operating agreement was clear. The forgery evidence was clear. The judge granted a preliminary injunction freezing major company decisions, ordered Gerald to produce all financial records within 14 days, and scheduled a follow-up hearing to address the underlying ownership dispute. More importantly, the judge said something my attorney told me was a big deal. She said the evidence looked like Gerald wasn't holding up his end as managing member, and if he kept it up, she'd consider removing him. When she said that, Gerald looked genuinely scared. The financial records arrived on day 13. My attorney and I went through them together. What we found was worse than I expected. Gerald had been paying himself a management fee that wasn't authorized in the operating agreement. He'd been running personal expenses through the company. He'd signed contracts with vendors owned by people who turned out to be his friends from the country club, at prices above market rate, and he'd been positioning the company to take on more debt, secured by company assets, to fund expansion plans that would have diluted my effective ownership stake over time. The numbers Mike had felt were off. He was right. One part supplier in particular stood out. A company Gerald had switched to about 8 months after Dad died, supposedly for better pricing. The invoices showed prices 12 to 15% higher than what Mike could get from his established contacts for the same parts. I asked Mike to pull the old quotes from his vendor relationships. The comparison was damning. Gerald had cost the company tens of thousands in unnecessary spending, and the supplier just happened to be run by a guy Gerald played golf with. My attorney called it a textbook case of self-dealing and breach of fiduciary duty. He said we could litigate this for years if we wanted to, but there was a faster path. We made Gerald an offer. He could either face a lawsuit that would expose everything he'd done, potentially including criminal referral for the forgery, or he could agree to a buyout. He would transfer his 50% membership interest to me in exchange for a structured payment over 5 years, secured by company assets. Seller financing kept it simple, cheaper for both sides than dragging this through court, and Gerald avoided a fraud referral in the process. He would resign from all company roles immediately. Theo would be terminated for cause based on documented operational failures, and Gerald would sign a release agreeing not to interfere with company operations or disparage the company to clients or vendors. The 5-year payout was manageable because it was structured against projected revenue, and Gerald knew fighting it in court would cost him more in legal fees than he'd ever recover while his dirty laundry got aired in public filings. Gerald tried to negotiate. He wanted more money. He wanted Theo to keep his job. He wanted to be called a consultant instead of being fired. My attorney told him the offer was the offer. Take it or see us in court. His attorney called back 48 hours later. Gerald accepted. The day the paperwork was signed, I walked into the Briggs Equipment Services office as the sole owner. Mike was waiting in the shop. He didn't say anything, just nodded once. That was enough. Theo cleaned out his desk that same afternoon. He didn't look at me. He packed his things into a cardboard box, got in his truck, and drove off. I called Dale at Permian Logistics that afternoon. I told him the situation was resolved, that I was now the sole owner and decision maker, and that I wanted to earn his business back. He said he'd give me one shot. A trial maintenance contract, smaller scope than what we'd had before, but real revenue built on trust I'd have to rebuild. First scheduled service, on time, right parts, 0 issues. Dale sent a one-line email after. That's what I remember. Red Iron Transport, another mid-sized account that had stopped calling, reached out within a month. Their fleet manager had heard through the grapevine that things had changed. Word travels fast in the Permian Basin. The next 6 months were work, real work. Rebuilding client relationships Gerald and Theo had damaged took more than phone calls. Some accounts came back immediately. Others took weeks of consistent service before they trusted us again. A few never came back at all. Not every bridge can be rebuilt. Cleaning up vendor accounts was its own project. Mike and I spent 3 full weekends going through every supplier relationship, comparing prices, renegotiating terms, cutting the ones that had been taking advantage of Gerald's cozy arrangements. Loyalty goes both ways. Base and West killed the forged guarantee once the ownership transfer went through. They took Gerald off all the accounts and put in a rule that any future guarantees needed 2 signatures. Gerald couldn't put his name on a napkin in that bank without someone flagging it now. Getting the credit line fixed up took a few more weeks, this time with real signatures and actual paperwork. Kara told me off the record that she'd been watching the situation and was glad to see it resolved the right way. Mike became my operations partner. He didn't want equity, said he was too old for that kind of pressure, but he wanted a profit share and real authority over the shop floor. Done. We promoted Ruben, one of the junior techs who'd been doing solid work, to lead tech. Cal, the kid who'd been stranded on 385, we parted ways on good terms. He found a shop job in Odessa that was a better fit. We brought in 2 new guys who actually knew diesel and wanted to learn. I kept the company name, Briggs Equipment Services. My dad built that reputation with his own hands, and I wasn't about to let Gerald's mistakes erase it. I did change the logo, though. Added Est, and the year my dad started it. Small thing. Meant a lot to me. Gerald moved to Houston. Last I heard, he was doing something in insurance sales. Theo's LinkedIn still says Business Development Executive, but there's no company listed underneath it. Neither of them have called me. I'm okay with that. The first time I deposited a check with my name as the sole owner on the account, I sat in my truck in the bank parking lot for a good 5 minutes just looking at it. Some nights I think about my dad. Wonder what he'd say if he could see how it all played out. I like to think he'd be proud that I didn't let Gerald strip the company for parts, that I fought for what was mine, that I protected what he built. Last month, Mike and I sat in the shop after hours going over the quarterly numbers. Revenue was up 15% from the same period last year. Client retention was solid. The bank had approved an equipment line for a 3rd service truck. We were growing the right way. No smoke and mirrors? Mike looked at the numbers and said one sentence, "Your old man would have liked this." That was the best compliment anyone could have given me. Guys, we are so close to hit 100,000 subscribers on this channel. If you are not subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing. It really helps hit that 100,000 mark. Thanks for making this dream come true.